Once again, this manufacturer led the way to smaller, lighter cameras. But it wasn't the Olympus OM1. What model is it? Watch the video. In the 1970s, as cameras, cars, and just about everything else continued to grow in size, Olympus took another approach and downsized the 35mm rangefinder and developed this little camera, their 35 RC. I'm not exactly sure what RC stands for. Maybe rangefinder compact? Sure, why not? Anyway, this is a almost full-featured rangefinder camera. It has a nice 42mm lens. It uses a battery on the bottom. I don't recall what battery it uses, so let's just check really quickly. So this looks like it uses the old 625 cell, which was very popular at that time. It's a mercury cell, no longer available. However, I believe with this camera you can simply take a 1.5 volt LR44 or SR76 silver oxide or lithium cell and put an O-ring on it and drop it into the battery chamber, and it should work just fine. What's to like about this camera? Well, compared with other cameras from that era, it's very small and compact, as I mentioned. How small was the Olympus 35 RC compared with other cameras? Well, let's compare it with a Yashica Electro 35. Now you can really see just how compact the Olympus 35 RC is. This is obviously a bit larger than most cameras. The Yashica has achieved cult status, but so has the Olympus 35 RC, and for good reason. What's not to like? It has a hot shoe, a traditional rewind crank. It has a shutter speed dial on top. It has apertures here at the base of the lens, and it has a focusing lens. So no scale focus, no guessing on the distance to your subject. You really just had to hold the camera, focus, and shoot. This is what's known as a quick throw, in that it has a very short distance from your closest distance, about 3 feet, to infinity. Here's your meter eye, and then here is where you set your film speed. This lever is your self-timer. This, in case you're wondering, this actually collected light and illuminated the frame lines. This viewfinder has parallax marks, which means as you focus closer to your subject, you would want to reframe your shot just slightly to compensate for parallax error. On the back, it's pretty clean. You have your film advance and you have your viewfinder, and that's it. Here's a synchronization for electronic flash. I think you could probably use this to synchronize off-camera flash, but that's sort of an exotic setup for the amateur photographer who was the intended target for this camera. This is a push and release rewind button. So when it's time to rewind your film, you just need to push this once, see, and then it stays depressed. Then afterward, you simply wind your film until it is back in the canister. To open the back, you did not pull up on the rewind crank. That's fixed in position. Instead, there's a small little lever here. Pull down on it. With my camera, you just have to pull the back open. Here's your pressure plate. The pressure plate keeps the film flat across the film gate. These are your film rails. Film feeds traditionally from left to right. Here's your frame counter, shutter release, and your shutter speed dial. I think I already pointed this out. This had a more limited set of shutter speeds. It did not have any speed slower than 1/15 of a second, but it did have a B speed. Your shutter speed offerings were 500, 1/250th, 1/125th, 1/60th, 1/30th, and 1/15th. And probably for most amateur photographers, that was plenty of range. That's probably all that you needed. I don't have the owner's guide for this, but you don't really need one. There was a small lens cap that came with it, and of course a hand strap. Notice there are 2 eyelets in case you wanted to use a traditional neck strap. With the size of this camera, I think a hand strap is sufficient. The viewfinder has a meter needle, because there's your meter eye, as I mentioned. And so it has a meter needle that sweeps across the top and shows you what shutter speed you should use. And on the bottom, it has an indicator to show you your selected aperture. Now, the one thing this did, let me show you something first. Anyway, there's flash. I'm sure this set this at a very small aperture. Then there's automatic, which means that the camera sets the aperture automatically. There's off, which is always helpful because it prevents you from running down the battery. And here are your aperture settings. There are no half-stop settings. Each one just clicks to the next aperture setting. Let's see what this camera weighs. This camera weighs 14.7 ounces, and when loaded with film, it's going to be right around that 15-ounce mark. So it comes in under 1 pound. That's certainly very acceptable. While it may seem like a lot of weight, it's actually not. For comparison, here's the Yashica 35, Electro 35. So the Yashica comes in at 1 pound 9 ounces, which is considerably heavier than this smaller Olympus. One thing to keep in mind today when buying one of these cameras, without fail, you are going to have to replace all of the rubber seals unless somebody has done that before you. Like most other cameras, they're not that difficult to replace. However, it does take time, probably 30 to 40 minutes. I don't know. I don't really time myself because I'm not in a race to reseal a camera. There's not much else to say about this camera other than it follows Olympus's path previous to this and in the future of breaking from the mainstream and coming up with designs that are very functional, yet also appealing to a mass audience. And in a few years, the market will see this with the introduction of the Olympus OM1 single lens reflex camera. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see any cameras featured in a future segment, please let me know in the comments below.